Hey, I'm Angela Walters, and this is the Midnight Quilt Show, and tonight I'm gonna bust my stash with a free quilt pattern I designed that's gonna highlight those beautiful fabric prints that I've curated over the years. Let's get started. I may have a bit of a problem. I love buying fabric. Surely you're not like that, right? I think of it more as a superpower, not necessarily a problem. But here I have my quilt stash, my fabric that I've curated over the years, and I really love to have it nice and organized and laid out by color and size and I'm sorry, I can't even get through that without laughing. This isn't my real stash, it's the decoy stash. This is what my family sees. Let me go grab my real stash real quick. This is my real stash. I know it's small, right? But it's only one box. There's plenty more where that came from. I've decided that for this pattern, I'm gonna use some of the fabric I already have laying around so I can buy new fabric. All I have to do is find 4 or 5 colors that look good together. Well, now that the workout's over, I can start going through my fabrics. Surely coming up with 4 or 5 that work will be easy out of this tub, right? I just have to use my fabric. I will use my fabric. All right, let's see what I've collected. Oh, I remember this. I love this one. I can't open it quite yet. It needs to age a little bit longer. Oh, and these fabrics, I love those. Those will look pretty, but I got those in Alaska. What did I make out of that? Looks like it was like a collar or something. And when that was from Canada, that was so fun. That's kind of cute. I don't know why it would be hard to use them, but it just is. I have 3/4 of a Dresden plate. That's not gonna help me here. Oh, you gotta see this. This was my first ever fabric collection. First fabric I designed, and that's actually all I have left of this print. I'll save it. Maybe, we'll put that in the maybe pile. Oh, and the hedgehog. That's gonna have to be a very special quilt. Oh my goodness, this is a whole quilt top. That's hilarious. I don't know why I have it in my stash pile. If only I knew somebody that was good at machine quilting that could finish it for me. I'd love to see what your stash looks like. Take a picture, put it on social media, and tag it with hashtag Midnight Quilt Show so I can see yours. Or at least what you're willing to show everybody. All right, okay, I gotta get serious. I gotta pick out this fabric because I gotta start. Oh, this fabric is amazing. It was hand dyed with glitter. I'm sorry, is there anything better than glitter? Well, besides wine, of course. I think this is gonna be a beautiful starting point. And I did just buy some fabric today from the quilt shop that would look nice with it. Does it still count as using it for my stash if I bought it the same day? What if it was in the morning? I'm gonna count it as stash. Oh, yeah, that's gonna look nice together. That look nice enough, they blend together, but not too much to be contrasting. Whew, that took longer than I thought it would. I need to get to cutting so I can finish this quilt. Okay, all I have to do is cut into my fabric. My precious fabric I've been saving, well, all day, but once I make something out of it, I can't make it into anything else, but that's all right, I can do it. I'm gonna get into the mood of things because if I am dealing with my stash, I feel like I need a mustache. So how about a handlebar? Oh, that would be kind of fun. It looks like a swirl. What do we think? Is it me? Should I went with a Tom Selleck? Well, I better stop messing around and get to cutting. Okay, so out of my fabrics, I'm gonna pick one of them to be my focal print or the one that's most prominent. And I do love blue, so I'm gonna go ahead and use that one first. All the fabrics are gonna get cut into 2.5-inch strips anyway. It's a stash buster. So if you already have a stash of 2.5-inch pre-cut strips, then you could just use those. If I'm doing multiple strips, I'll go to the 5-inch line and cut it, and then take it to the 2.5-inch line and then cut it. It just means I don't have to reposition my ruler quite as much. I don't know if it makes that big of a difference, but it makes me feel like I'm being more efficient. A few more of these and then I gotta cut up the rest of the colors. Since I've been doing this show for a while, I feel like we've really gotten to know each other and we're friends, so it's okay if I make a mess, because that's what I would do if you were here sewing with me anyway. And I've actually written a pattern that tells you exactly how many strips to cut out and where to put what, and all that information is in the description box below. Okay, and now it's time for the piece de resistance, the fabric that started this whole idea. Oh, it's so pretty. I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can cut it quite yet. I feel like it's destined for something a little bit different. Maybe I'll save it for later. I have my strips and I just have to sew them together, but what makes this basic pieced quilt look so interesting is the layout of the fabrics. So I'm gonna use that mitered seam that you probably already know from making binding, but I'm gonna show you just in case you're like me and don't like to bind. So I'm gonna take one of my strips. This one is my blue, my more dominant color. So I have it laying right side up. I'm gonna take my next piece. Let's see, this green is speaking to me right now. It's saying, use me. I'm gonna take it and put it right side down with that other color. So just right on top of each other, corner to corner. And honestly, I'm not much of a perfectionist. You already know that. So if they don't line up exactly perfectly, if I have a little bit of a ragged edge, I'm fine with that, but you could trim that off if you were more perfectionist. And then I'm going to sew a line from this corner to the opposite side. And you could definitely mark that out. I'm not going to do that because I like to get sewing quickly. I mean, I guess if it were a longer one, I would just go ahead and mark it, but I figure I can eyeball it close enough. And here's what I have. I have a little bit of extra laying over here, so I'm going to trim that off real quick. You could use a rotary cutter, but I'm just going to roughly cut it with scissors. That way I don't have to drag out my mat and my rotary blade and all that stuff. So about 1/4 of an inch. You don't want it too bulky because then you'll have all that extra fabric in there. And then when I pull it apart, I'm gonna get that nice 45-degree angle. Doesn't that look beautiful? Just looks so nice and pointy. Okay, I'm gonna do one more with the same exact colors and then show you how it comes together. I could be more organized and clean, but I'm just gonna chuck it into a pile. I like to have it pile up over here because it's not trash, it's progress, right? The bigger that pile gets, that means the closer I am to finishing my quilt. I just figure I'll leave it on there till it gets in the way and I'll just scoot it on over. So now I need a centerpiece for all my strips to go around, and I just need a bigger chunk of something. Let me see. Oh, here, this looks like this should work. About 8 by 11. And remember, all these measurements are in the pattern. I can't wait to show you how this comes together. So I have the centerpiece, and these mitered strips are gonna work their way around the outside, but I'm gonna be really intentional about where I place the fabrics because I really want it to look like it's turning the corner. So this whole long strip is actually gonna go right about here, and I can play with the placement of where I want that mitered line to land. And then once I have it kind of in place, I'm just gonna roughly cut it to size. And I'll trim it up here in a second because I really wanna make sure that it's the same size, because if you don't trim your borders and you just keep sewing and sewing, you get a very not flat quilt, which, you know, is fine, but I'll go ahead and measure them out. And this strip goes back in the pile because I'll use that again for another mitered seam on down the line. And then the next one, you can play around with the placement and decide what you like, but I'm gonna kind of line it up. And what I really wanna do is have the fabric placement kind of make that side right there. I don't know, I'm easily amused, so I find that very amusing. And again, I'm gonna roughly cut those out. Now in the pattern, it'll have the exact measurements you wanna eventually cut these to, but I just do this so it gives me a little bit of wiggle room so I can play around with where the fabric is going. So what I'm going to do is trim that to 8.5, and then the sides over here, and then put them back in their place. All right, they're much smaller now, much cleaner, and you can see how that's gonna look so cute. Now, one thing I wanna point out is I'm working around the block, so I'll do top, left, bottom, right. I know that's kind of against the way most quilt patterns go together, where it's top and bottom and then the sides, but I want to be really intentional with the fabric placement. I don't know, I just love how it turns that corner. So the next strips that will come in, you're gonna see how it has that color on the corners as well. So it kind of frames that center block. Now I just have to sew it together, the top, the side, the bottom, the other side, and we'll see if it comes out somewhat square. All right, see, that's the first round. It's looking nice, looking like my shattered frames, which is the name I gave the pattern. So you can see the colors on the corners. So now all I have to do is press it and then make my mitered seams and do some more for the next ring around the quilt. Okay, I've got it pressed and I already happen to have the other strips ready to go. So I'm gonna start laying them out and decide where they look the best. And what's fun about this pattern is you can really make it as scrappy as you want. It's kind of like a guided improv piecing type of thing, which is a lot of fun. I mean, I don't have a degree in art or anything. My degree's in fast food with a minor in French fries. All right, so there we go. Okay, again, if you're making this, you can play around with the fabric placement and have a really good time with it. Right now, I'm just kind of keeping them opposite of each other. I'm gonna sew it together and man, I'm kind of making a mess here. I mean, I like a little bit of progress, but this is a little crazy. Here, I got my little bitty buddy. It's gonna help keep my scraps together. Plus, I can play music to myself if I want to. Oh gosh, I crack myself up sometimes. Oh wait, no, you're not trash. You come here. Okay, let's sew this together. No, don't freak out. That's not a trash can. That's my stash holder. I'm keeping all those scraps for a very important project later to be determined. So I have the next few rows laid out and I'm loving how it's looking. Now, normally when I'm working on this, I would just do one row at a time. That way I can place it and then sew it. Because what happens is when you get all these different sizes up, sometimes it can be kind of confusing. Now, just know that when you're making your shattered frames quilt, that you don't have to use these miter seams for every side. There's times in here where I've used solid pieces just because it's quicker. Wait, no. I used it because it gave it a certain ambiance, a je ne sais quoi that looked nice. Anyway, I've got it laid out. I'm gonna sew it together and show you what it looks like. Okay, got those strips all put together. Now I need to keep going round and round and round until this quilt gets finished. And I think I'm going to get right on that right this minute. Maybe in just a minute. Okay, let's do it. And there's the quilt top. Now, of course, I could have kept going, but I thought, you know what, that's big enough and I'm ready to get to the quilting anyway. Now, what I think is so fun about this pattern, and of course I'm biased since I designed it, but I love that you can be so random with the fabric placement. So as I worked my way out from the center, the pieces got smaller, they got more random, but ultimately, I think it looks great. I've picked out the perfect backing for this quilt. It's a nice boundless botanical and it's busy fabric, so if my quilting tension isn't quite perfect, it's not gonna show up anyway. Well, I'm gonna make that into a quilt sandwich and get quilting. This quilt top is now a sandwich. I've basted it with the batting and the backing, and I'm ready to get to my personally favorite part, the quilting. But I'm more excited than normal because I'm using a fun, shiny gold thread. Now, when I quilt for customers, I always use a thread color that matches, but since I'm keeping this quilt, I thought, you know what, why not add a little bling with the quilting? Sure, that means it'll show up a little bit more, but in my world, that's always a good thing. So this pattern is called Shattered Frames because it all frames that center of the quilt, and I can put some really intricate quilting in that area, and then do some fun border designs as well. But the best part, it's a free pattern. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get started with the quilting. So since the center of the quilt is what's most important to me, that's where I'm gonna put my more intricate quilting. So what I'm doing is I'm combining all sorts of fun shapes to create this fun improv quilting kind of design. I threw in a few clamshells because why not? Those are so cute. And a couple swirls. You know I'm a swirl girl, I love those. And then even a few pebbles. But the fun thing about this is you can pick any designs, combine them, fill it all in, it's gonna look great. The most important thing is I just don't have any gaps in between the quilting. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get to quilting some of these borders since I'm right here. So what I'm doing here in the border is taking a serpentine line, which is a really fun shape, and using it to create almost like a concave kind of curve in which I start filling in with more serpentine lines. And what I'm doing is making sure that whole space is nice and filled in. And this is great because I can make my section, fill it in, and then when I'm ready to do the next one, I'm gonna echo right along that line I just quilted onto that side and then make another little curve or hill shape that goes the opposite direction. So now I'm gonna fill that in with more of those serpentine lines. And it doesn't really even have to be this kind of shape. It could be more of a curvier shape if you wanted, it doesn't matter. And then here I am at the corner, but turning the corner at borders doesn't have to be tricky. All I'm gonna do is just go into the next direction, making my little curves and filling it in with those serpentine lines. I'm trying really hard to keep the spacing nice and consistent because if the spacing is consistent, it makes the whole thing look perfect. So now all I need to do is pick out a few more designs for those borders and finish up the rest of this quilt. I'm gonna get to it, but I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Woohoo! This thing is done. The quilting is finished. I'm super loving how it turned out. It's always great when I'm amused by the quilting designs. It just makes the whole process go so much faster. So here's the center of the quilt with all those combined designs. It just looks harder than it actually is. I'm basically just doodling with thread. But as I worked out into those extra borders, I wanted to play around with different designs, keep myself from getting too bored. So I quilted some straight lines in the turquoise and in some of those borders. I love how it emphasizes the shatteredness, brokenness of the, I don't know. I just thought it would look like fun. And then of course I got tired of quilting those straight lines, so I switched to a swirl, and this little hook is awesome because it fills in that area just perfectly. I mean, basically I was just trying to think of all the border designs that I could think of and put them on here. I did a couple other ones. They didn't turn out quite as good, so I'm not gonna show those to you. Just kidding. All right, I'm gonna use the rest of these leftover scraps, finish up making my scrappy binding, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all finished. Whew, I feel like I could do a happy dance because this quilt is finished and the scrappy binding turned out so cute, which is kind of amazing. I don't really like to bind, but I love how that turned out. This quilt was so fun to make using different fabrics, different arrangements, and then finishing up with some shiny gold thread. How could that not be a great night? The only problem is I don't understand how I ended up with more scraps than I started with. Well, I guess I'm gonna go ahead and have to start another box of my stash. But I don't understand that anyway. Why would you wanna bust your stash? It's not like coin collectors spin their coins. It's not like stamp collectors use their stamps. Okay, now to label this with something that will keep people out of it. How about broccoli? No. IRS taxes, no. Cleaning supplies, nobody will ever look in here and in. Ooh, I could put toxic. There we go. That's sure to keep them out of my stash. So the great thing is, now that I've used up some of my fabric, you know what that means, I get to buy more fabric. But you don't have to make a quilt to buy more fabric. Craftsy has a great deal on your next fabric purchase. All you have to do is check out the details in the description box below. So be sure to like the video, subscribe, but most importantly, I wanna see your stash. No, not your mustache, your fabric stash. So take a picture of your stash and post it on social media using the hashtag Midnight Quilt Show so I can see what your stash looks like. Well, now my stash and I are going to go to bed. See you next time.